Come on into the football room, everybody. Today we are breaking down the receiver class, a few players that we are higher on than the consensus, a few players we are lower on, as well as one of our hosts stepping onto the hot seat and giving us a bold take that they have in this class. Make sure you guys are subscribed on YouTube here at the Film Room and looking out on A to Z NFL Fans Facebook, where the show is also being live streamed. Welcome, everybody. The football room is officially open. My name is Destin Adams. I'm one of your hosts here. I'm a Colts beat writer and NFL draft analyst at A to Z Sports.com. With me every single week, you guys are going to get to know us. And one of my co-hosts is Damian Parsons. I like to call him Mr. NFL Draft. This guy puts his entire life on the line for you guys to cover the NFL draft, whether that's here at A to Z Sports, Locked On NFL Draft every single day, Monday through Friday for you guys, and his full-time job at the Draft Network, where he also covers the NFL draft. And then we have Mr. X's and O's himself, James Foster. Sit back, let this guy talk, and he's going to teach you more about football, I promise. So Damian, man, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Anytime I could be on camera talking some football, NFL draft, and these prospects, it makes my day.
Yeah, every day. As I said earlier. James, man, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to battle it out over some receiver prospects with you guys today.
Hey, like James just said, we are going to be diving in straight into this draft class, and what better way to talk about than this incredible receiver class? We're going to talk the good. We're going to talk the bad. And believe it or not, from what you see online, there is some bad here. So we're going to talk about we're each going to have a prospect in this receiver class that we feel like we are higher on than the consensus. And then we're each going to have a player that we feel like we're lower on than the consensus. And we're going to go through, we're going to talk about those players. And then we have a special treat for you guys at the end to welcome everybody to the football room in a special way. So I feel like there's no better way to start than to throw it to my boy, Damian. Damian, we're going to start off with which receiver prospect you feel like you are higher on than the consensus.
Michigan wide receiver, not Roman Wilson, right? Not the guy that had a great week down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, but his counterpart, Cornelius Johnson, he had a great week for himself down at the Shrine Bowl. And this was a guy that popped onto the scene for me back in 2021, in the summer of 2022, and I scouted Michigan and scouted him. And this is a big athletic receiver that in that run-heavy offense didn't get a chance to showcase his full skill set. So when you watch the tape of him in one-on-ones at Shrine Bowl practice, watching him run routes, the release package, the vertical speed that he has, but also the body control and the ability to high point at the catch point, and he run blocks. Tough, physical young man that I think he could be a better pro, and he will be a better pro at the next level. Getting him into an offense that says, hey, you don't have to run block 45 times a game. Like, we're going to actually throw the ball and spread things out a little bit. And I think with him, man, I end up grading him as a 4th-round developmental prospect because he has all of the physical traits and tools that you really look for. I think he'd probably be a 4 or 5 athlete at the NFL Scouting Combine, which we'll be at in a couple weeks. I think this is a young man that has an NFL-ready body, game, and intelligence in terms of understanding leverage and being able to attack and move DBs off the spot in man-to-man coverage, get to his spots, beat zone coverage, find and make himself available, but he's strong enough to make plays after the catch. They just did not feature the passing game at all at Michigan. If you watch Michigan, you know it was a lot of Blake Corum and the run game. So for me, Cornelius Johnson is a guy that I'm excited to see it down in in Indianapolis, be up there in your backyard, Destin, because this is a young man that has a lot of game to him. And, he kind of reminds me a little bit of is it Allen Robinson? A little bit, but he's listed as 6'2", almost 215. He's got the type of height, weight, and body type to play either X or Z, but he also could play as the power slot in some 3 wide receiver packages if you want to move him down and get him matched up on some of those smaller DBs. So I like Cornelius Johnson more than the consensus.
I'm assuming we're talking about Chicago, Allen Robinson. Some of these Pittsburgh takes we don't want to get in there.
Yeah, we don't want the Pittsburgh version though. No, I don't want to do that to my guy Cornelius. We can't. I don't even believe that there's a Pittsburgh version of Allen Robinson, I think that's an AI. I don't think that's actually him. So I want to go back to the Chicago version where we saw some good stuff happening with him.
Yeah, but let's just stay away from anything to do with the Steelers offense from this
Correct.
past year for sure. So when you say that you're over the consensus on it, I'm just curious. Like if you had to say a round range of like where you personally would take him, if I gave you that GM hat right now and your eval, what would you go with?
Mid to late third at the earliest, definitely top of the fourth as at the latest. Because I look at a young man that catches the ball well, runs good routes especially for a 6'2", to almost 215-pound wide receiver. He can get in and out of his breaks, and he can sink his hips well, but he also can get vertical, whether with his speed or at the catch point. So for me, I would say, especially if I need a bigger body receiver, mid to late third at the earliest, at worst, that fourth round.
Hey, I like to hear it. I like to hear it. National champion. I mean, there's not a lot that you can't like with a guy coming off that season like that. I don't know if I'd take him in the third just because of where this receiver class is. I can see where you're coming from, him as a prospect. I just think, like, if you would have put Cornelius in last year's class, for example, with not as many bigger bodies, like, I think his stock would have been talked about at a much higher rate. So sometimes it's just the luck of the draw when you're able to come out, right? So that's not a con on him. I just think because of this class being so stacked there, it may hurt him a little bit. But I definitely see where you're coming from on him. For me, I'm going to go next, and the player that I feel higher than the consensus on, it's going to be a little bit more of a higher profile name than Dame. So go ahead and get your laughs off when I say the name. But I'm going to say Troy Franklin out of Oregon. So Troy Franklin out of Oregon for me, I think I'm higher than the consensus on him because he's my receiver 4 in this class. I have him just behind the Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, and obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. at receiver 1. I have Troy Franklin as that next guy. When I see Troy Franklin on tape, I think he's a guy that I think the thing that people are getting right on him is how well he's going to be able to take the top off the defense, be that deep threat. But I think the area that is not being talked about enough is that that's not all he can do. I feel like he's a really well-polished route runner, real surefire hands, which some of the players I see him getting compared to online, like that surefire hands thing comes up for me. Because if I see another MVS comparison with Troy Franklin and all the drops that I've had to see that guy have, I don't know if I've seen Troy Franklin have anywhere near that amount of issues to compare him to that style of player. So to me, when I watch Troy Franklin and how he wins routes and how he does there, I think I see a guy like Terry McLaurin, but I see Troy Franklin being 6'2", a bigger body, but being a guy that can win in a similar way that I've seen Terry win. I think he's a guy that teams will use in a speedway the way that guys like Terry have been used. For me, I think he should be a surefire first round pick, even in this top heavy receiver class. I think if you give Troy Franklin a Mahomes, a Josh Allen at the end of the first round, oh baby, I mean, that could be a rookie of the year candidate this next year if you give him a quarterback like that to copy that game there. But I mean, James, when I say Troy Franklin as receiver 4, I know he's not that high on your board, but like, what are your thoughts there of me having him that high?
Yeah, I think Troy Franklin is probably one of the most like contentious receiver prospects in this class. I have him at 45th on my board. He is wide receiver 10, but that speaks more to the strength of the class and like, guys like Lad McConkey, Xavier Legette, Xavier Worthy that I have in that range. I think that um, between them and Troy Franklin, it's all going to depend on what exactly you're looking for. I would disagree with the reliable hands with Troy Franklin. I mean, 9 drops this past year. That's really like the main thing that's keeping him from being a first round pick on my board is just like you can't trust him not only to bring in easy catches because of the focus drops, but also the ability to win at the catch point and out physical his opponent. Be interested to see what he weighs in at the combine because he is kind of rail thin, tall, does have that MVS kind of build. So, I really like how smooth he is at the line of scrimmage. I like his release package, his ability to vary pace, vary his tempo, and then obviously the deep speed. And like there are flashes of ball skills. It's I would draw the contrast between him and someone like Quentin Johnston, where you watch Quentin Johnston catch the ball last year and like he's bringing it into his body. He's, jumping for catches where he's wide open and doesn't need to, just doesn't look natural catching the football. I don't get that sense with Troy Franklin. It's more just focus drops and not having the most reliable hands. So there is a chance that that's something that you get some progress there when he gets to the NFL. But just how comfortable and how comfortable I feel with him catching the ball reliably is my biggest issue with Troy Franklin as like a first round top 20 type of prospect.
Yeah, I like Troy. I like him, but 4 is high. And 4 is high for me mainly because while I do think for a 6'3" guy, he sinks his hips well. He gets in and out of breaks pretty well and nice smoothness and fluidness to it. I don't think his route tree is really robust or expanded from with that kind of limited Oregon offense that they ran and that he was a part of. But I want to see, I think I saw like it's crazy because you talk about MVS. I compared him to a more polished Jalen Hyatt, where you're getting that deep speed, but he has the ability to run routes, like which we know Jalen did not run a ton of routes in Tennessee. His time there, but also his release package is better than because Jalen was never pressed, right? So he didn't have that experience and everything. I look back to that matchup against with Troy and Jabbar Muhammad. That was like the best corner he faced, and he struggled in those matchups because Jabbar was not going to give him. He couldn't open the hit, couldn't force him to open the gate, couldn't force him to open the hips like that. He's very reliant on that skip walk release at the line of scrimmage against like soft coverage, and it's like it works against guys who are just not quick twitch and stuff like that. They're flat-footed and they're trying to play kind of soft shoe, but I want to see him just embrace at the catch point, but also through physicality, through the contact. When guys get their hands on him, you can get them dead to rights. Like you can stop the momentum, you can kind of close them off and wall them off. And like you think, just like with Jabbar Muhammad, talking about kick step, jab with the hand, and now you're impeding his ability to get into his route stem. And with that, the lack of physicality with him, I saw some people say he was like Devonta Smith, and I'm like, listen, no, okay, like Smitty was called a Slim Reaper for a reason. You know what I mean? Like you turn on the tape of Smitty, and he was out there mossing SEC DBs, Derek Stingley Juniors, and all those different strong, athletic, physical guys. Where I don't see that level of physicality from Troy, and I wish that's the one thing I wish I saw more of. But I do think that he's a good player. He's still a top 10 wide receiver for me. And like you said, Dustin, if he gets to a spot, I mean, Lamar going to the Baltimore Ravens and bringing that bigger, deeper speed that they needed receiver with Lamar Jackson. God, the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, or even if he was to fall to like the second and somehow went to the Chargers to a Justin Herbert, like a big arm quarterback is what's going to be needed to give him the best chance of reaching his ceiling. I don't want him in, dare I say, like a Carolina. I don't want it with Bryce Young. That's not a good cut. That's a contrast of styles and strengths and weaknesses, and I don't want any part of that. So I still think he's a top 10 wide receiver. He's probably around that 7-8 spot for me right now, but I just don't have him as high as 4.
I think that 4 to 12 range really jumbled in this class, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a testament how good this class is. So, like, how you rank him in that 4 to 12, like,
and it's all
I'm not gonna have too many gripes. I will say I don't think every drop is made the same. I think a lot of the drops that you see with Franklin are similar to some of these faster players at the next level, where you're thinking about that second foot before the ball gets there and the drop happens. Where I don't compare what I saw with Franklin's drops this past year to what we see with some of these MVS in Kansas City, for example, when a deep ball comes in and, hey, he brought it in the Super Bowl, so nobody's going to bring it up on him now. But for any of those deep balls where it just doesn't track it into his hands well and it goes through, I don't think that's a Franklin issue personally. I think Oregon's limited offense, it makes people question some of his route tree ability because they just don't ask him to do enough. And sometimes that's warranted. Jalen Hyatt with Tennessee this past year didn't have to run any routes, right? And then he gets to the next level and, oh, yeah, he's going to struggle to run routes for a little bit. I think I saw enough on tape to see that I think Franklin's a smarter player than what Hyatt was coming out in that sense of things. So I think Franklin is going to have a very good transition to the pro level because of that. But hey, we'll see where he goes. Receiver 4, receiver 10. I'm not going to gripe too much about it. But James, I think you have another receiver for us that you feel like you're higher on than the consensus.
Yeah, the receiver that I'm highest on compared to consensus is Florida wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. I think, he had a rough first 2 or 3 maybe reps at the Senior Bowl, but I thought he was lights out. Outside of that, he kind of got bodied by Quinyon Mitchell on one of his early reps. But then you saw the precise and quick route running, the ability to win at the catch point. He had probably the catch of the year against, was it Charlotte early in the season? It was one of those smaller schools where he just plucked it out of the air with one hand. Very secure catching the football. He's nuanced, precise as a route runner. Any kind of timing based route whether it's sitting down in between zone coverage, cutting off his route at the right time. He just, has that it factor as a route runner in terms of his quickness in and out of breaks, but also understanding how to attack the defensive back's leverage. He has kind of limited physical traits from a size perspective, so he's not going to be this elite yak threat. But I really think outside of that, he's got the speed to win over the top. I think he can play slot or Z, and he's someone that I'm more than comfortable taking in the 3rd round. I was working on a mock draft this past weekend and had him going late 2nd, actually. So, I think he's consensus 78. I have him 60th on my board. Not a huge difference. I guess, the rest of NFL media is maybe higher on him than I thought. But, I think he's someone you could definitely make the argument for in the 2nd round.
Listen, you're talking to a big fan of Ricky Pearsall. I absolutely love Ricky Pearsall's game, and with the route running, you talk that the toughness, right? I think there was another game this year where he just kind of showcased his clutch ability, where it's that kind of what we talk about, that dog mentality, where it's listen, man, just feed me the ball. And I think they fed it to him in the second half. He ended up getting out. It might have been South Carolina, if I remember correctly. And he ended up getting, I think, the game when he either set them up for a game with a field goal or he scored the game with a touchdown. But he knows how to get open. I think even early in the especially I think the first day of practice, going from pretty sure Florida uses actual grass turf to that beady. I was on the field at the Senior Bowl. I hate the turf. I hate that stuff, that artificial. And I remember he tripped, and I thought he ended up hurting himself. He was a little dinged up for a little bit. He was limping around, but he stayed. He showed that toughness. He stayed in practice and he kept going. And I think this is a guy that, I always said that, man, I talked to my guys over at the Draft Network. I said the guy that he reminded me of, I usually don't like to do the wide receiver comps. It's lazy a lot of times, but he reminds me a lot of Adam Thielen. And for me, it's you could play him at the Z. You could play him in the slot. I do not feel like he's just a slot-only receiver. People will probably look at him and say, well, yeah, I'm going to put him in the slot. Just let him live there. Oh, you could, and he's going to do really good things for you. I think he could play the Z spot. I think he can stretch vertical. He can run every route in the route tree and in the book. Man, I think this is a really good player. And if somebody's going to get a day one type of impact player, unless your receiver room is a little log jammed with some veterans and he has to earn his keep and earn his way, then sure. But if you have a needed wide receiver and you need somebody that can come in and make your quarterback's reads easy, Ricky Pearsall is going to do that.
Yeah, I have grown to love the quick route winner receiver over these last couple of years. This last draft cycle obviously gave us a lot of that archetype, but I love Ricky Pearsall's game because of that. Obviously, I cover the Indianapolis Colts here at A to Z Sports. So Josh Downs comes to mind as somebody that has a similar archetype. And Pearsall, Arizona State to Florida. You see him do a little bit of both of it, right? At both spots, you see him continue to do that. I think at Florida last year, we saw him beat zone coverage and find the opening in zone at a really high level, a lot where he just wouldn't even get the ball. He would just find his spot and just sit there. And I remember just yelling at tape sometimes this year, like, he's right there. We get to the Senior Bowl, and honestly, if Roman Wilson isn't the guy taking all the headlines from those first 2 days of practice, Ricky Pearsall was that next guy for me that was dominating his one-on-ones, which is a drill made for receivers to dominate. I understand, but it was still impressive just to see his footwork and see how smart of a route runner he is. And I was impressed at how much he played through contact. A guy that when the press coverage would come and the hand fighting would get there, he wouldn't throw him off too much. And when we got him to see him in 11 on 11, 6 on 6, even a little bit, because they didn't do 7 on 7 all that much. They did a lot of 6 on 6 though at the Senior Bowl. I thought we got to see him still find those openings in the zone really well. And you could see that there's a lot of trust in him as a route runner to kind of deter what the call route is for him, to let him find those spots. So you give him a younger quarterback and just let him be that safety blanket. I definitely think there's a place for him to go in that third, on that day 2 range. I saw a mock draft the other day that somebody did that was a 7-round mock for a team, and they had their team getting Ricky in like the 5th. And I was just like, I just don't think that kind of receiver is going to be there in the 5th round. But hey, it's that time of year, so can't wait to see all these mock draft machines.
Guys. Anything's possible.
It
just
is true.
Not that.
Anything's possible except Ricky Pearsall in the 5th round. But yeah, I like that for sure. So James, you got to go last for your top, but we're gonna let you go first for the guy that you're a little lower on than the consensus. And from what I saw in our little messages, this one might be a little controversial to some people.
Yeah, so I went with Michigan wide receiver Roman Wilson, and this is less of me calling him overrated. Like, I have him at 70 on my board. He's 71st on the consensus board, so I'm technically higher on him. It's more of a pump the brakes with Roman Wilson. I'm seeing him. I saw him go like 32nd in a mock draft. It might have been Daniel Jeremiah this past week. And seeing him consistently go in the 2nd round, it seems like he was the player, I think, from an underwhelming week from the receivers at the Senior Bowl. He was clearly the best on the field, pretty much uncoverable. And it had me second guessing my evaluation, because heading into that week, I had like a late 4th round grade on him. I thought that his tape was kind of underwhelming, but according to Feldman's Freaks list, like, he's going to run a 6.20 in the 3 cone, 4.33 in the 40-yard dash. So kind of, freak athlete, rough around the edges. That's like a late 4th. But then, watching him at the Senior Bowl, he was much more impressive, much more tight with his route running. And, it had me go back to the tape and question if I had misevaluated him or something. And I was rewatching his tape the week after the Senior Bowl, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is not really that impressive of tape. There's a lot of routes where he doesn't seem to have much of a plan. I think that he needs to remove a lot of false steps, needs to do a much better job stemming with proper tempo. Same thing with Cornelius Johnson, where it's such a low target volume in Michigan's offense. You could watch 11 Michigan games and you're going to get the same amount of like gradable reps as you would from watching 4 games of another player. So kind of a difficult evaluation, but I thought he was inconsistent against press coverage. Doesn't give you much after the catch. I think, 2 broken tackles in 2023. And so with Roman Wilson, you've got a very undersized but very athletic, someone that projects as a slot receiver, but they're undersized and they're kind of a project in terms of route running. It's not like an Amon-Ra St. Brown situation where he's just going to plug and play, immediately be this high level separator. So, I see the upside with Roman Wilson. I see what people like in him, and I agree with a lot of that stuff. I just think any 1st round conversation to me is ridiculous. And I think him being a consensus second rounder is even a little bit too much.
So would you say right now that you feel like his most likely landing spot for you, if you were a GM, would be the third?
Yeah, I have a late third round grade on him.
And I mean, I'll say that I thought Roman Wilson at the Senior Bowl performed way better than I thought he would. Obviously, I had a similar take going in, but I think a lot of it comes back to just how little Michigan relied on their passing game, which didn't allow Rome to kind of show that, which I felt like the Senior Bowl was going to be big for him because of that, right? He was going to be able to kind of show his entire package a little bit. And I think he did. Whenever you are so good the first 2 days that your agent's getting you in your ear saying, you should probably sit out day 3. It usually tells you what that guy is probably hearing in those meetings with teams. I think it all ends up with Rome or a receiver like that is the team fit and what they're looking for at receiver. I mean, one of my favorite places to mock him in my last mock draft, I had him go into the Chargers in the early second. I really like his fit with Harbaugh once again, with a guy like Justin Herbert, and being a style of receiver that the Chargers don't really have consistent play out of, unless you want to talk about Davis from TCU, who mostly was a kick returner this past year that they could use a little bit more in that way if they wanted to. I think if you give a guy like Rome, a guy like Justin Herbert, that's why I could see him going in the early part of the second, just because there are areas that could use that style of running, that style of receiver. It'll really just depend though on those fits for me. I have a late second, early third grade on him right now, so he's in that cusp for me. And obviously, people are going to get moved up just because I don't have 32 first round grades, like no one else is going to either. So it would really just depend on fit.
Yeah, for me, Rome came into the Senior Bowl week with a mid to low third round grade for me. And one thing I always remember is that what a player does on tape is what they're asked to do and what they're allowed to do. So, like, as much as, don't get me wrong, tape is so important, but at the same time, the context behind everything is always important as well. And I wanted to see how he handled when guys got up on him at the Senior Bowl. I remember talking to a couple of the DBs. I'm like, what was it like facing Rome? And he was like, listen, he's nuanced. He was like, man, his tempo, the way he kind of like his footwork, it was very hard to get a beat on him to where you could just punch and get your hands on him at the line of scrimmage. Where if you remember, him versus Quignon called him out. Quignon was the best DB down in Mobile. He called him out one-on-one, and he got Quignon. I talked to Quignon about that exact rep. He was like, yeah, I called him out. He's like, man, we battled, he beat me a couple, and I had him a couple reps and everything. So what I saw down in Mobile was exactly what I wanted to see. To help that projection go into the league, where it's like in that Michigan offense is heavy run action, play action, crossers, rub routes, different things of that nature. But this is a tough young man. Like, yeah, he's 5'11", but he'll go up for the ball. You think back to that Alabama game, right? He had one of the most pivotal catches in that game, working across the middle of the field, but it wasn't just working across the middle. It was using the referee as a shield from the defender that was trying to track him. And not only that, then cutting underneath, making the play on the ball, and then making the play afterwards. But what James did say that I have in my report over at the Draft Network was he doesn't give you a lot after the catch, right? He's not a super elusive guy. He's more of a catch, give me a runway, set up my blocks, and now I can take it. He coming out of high school, I think it was the Nike Open, he ran the blazing 4.37. So it's hard to see it on tape for Michigan because they don't send them vertical enough. Where you saw him in the one-on-ones, when they did let him go vertical in Mobile, you saw a guy that could take the top off, could stretch the defensive backs with his speed. And his speed was almost so smooth that it didn't look like it was like he was moving at the pace he was, right? But you just watched it, and he was easily pulling away from guys. And only if the quarterbacks were getting the ball out in front of these guys, on some of the one-on-ones down in Mobile, he would have been able to really take advantage of it. They were just kind of throwing them and everything. But I think this is a guy that, for me, that I'm kind of right where you are, Destin, and talking to scouts out there, they viewed him as one of the most impressive guys out there. He's going to probably be that late second, that early third round read. Somebody's going to take this young man and put him in the right spot. I think he could play the slot, the Z, be a field stretcher for you, but also work horizontally in your passing game. And that's a guy I really appreciated this game, seeing him down in Mobile and getting him away from that darn Michigan offense that did not allow him or Cornelius Johnson to showcase what they really can do.
Yeah, I mean that. We'll talk so much about some of these Michigan prospects this draft cycle. There's a good amount of them for that offensive side of the ball, and reasons why their tape just doesn't give us the full story, which makes it hard. And hey, that's why the people in the NFL get paid the big bucks, right? They have to make these hard decisions and find these things. But for me, I'm gonna go Florida State's Johnny Wilson, and he's an interesting one because at tight end, if he moved to tight end, I'd have a very high look of him. And we got to see it at the Senior Bowl a little bit. He did run with the tight end some, so you can tell that there's at least some knowledge there in his head that he might have to switch depending on where he's drafted. And I think it's a drastic change on my board if he goes to tight end. I think he's a guy that could see his stock improved by 2 rounds if he goes to tight end. 6'7", big body. At Florida State, though, I don't know if there was a reason that they didn't look to give him more opportunities over the top because they didn't trust in it. I don't know if it was their offenses. I don't know. But we didn't get to see him use that size all that much. And that concerned me a little bit on tape. We get to the Senior Bowl. I thought he had a better week than some people give him credit for. When they're talking about losers of the week, I saw him used a lot. I thought he did pretty solid in one-on-ones, especially when he got to go up against safeties and linebackers. I remember there was a rep against Javon Bullard from Georgia. Dusted him. Johnny dusted him off the snap. I think you see it there, what he can be as a tight end. I'm interested to see how he tests because I think that could probably be the stamp that makes his choice for him, essentially, when he's talking to teams, how he tests. Because if he's not somebody that is going to go out there and look the part of a receiver in these drills and what he's compared to, because I'm assuming he's going to run with receivers at this moment, then I think we could see the switch. But at receiver, I've seen a lot of people throwing around round 2, round 3. I just can't see it as a receiver. To me, he's going to be a day 3 pick as a receiver. I just do not see a way that a team trusts him enough to come in route tree wise, to trust him as a surefire over the top, use his size in the red zone receiver, just because we haven't seen it. And we'll see what that looks like here come the combine, because if he moves to tight end, my whole vibe's gonna change around him, and you're gonna see a lot of positive tweets from the Destin Adams at Twitter on Johnny Wilson as a tight end. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, with Johnny Wilson, it's interesting because I think he could be, and I've tweeted out, if he goes to tight end, you're getting the Darren Waller, Jimmy Graham type of tight end. That's just what you're getting at with this type of guy, right? 6'7", and I remember walking down the sideline to Senior Bowl. I'm 5'5", so you know what I mean. When he walks past me, or I'm standing beside him, and I'm just yo, and I remember taking a picture of him and I tweeted it out because his arm length is crazy. I'm pretty sure he can literally tap his knees just standing straight up. And he has outstanding arm length.
He's got his arm length is 98th percentile for tight ends. It's over crazy. 35 inches.
It's absolutely crazy. And so, kind of watching him off the field, very, very good kid, jovial, stays loose, likes to have fun. And I think for him, it was the concentration drops were the big thing for me on tape. He had a lot of concentration drops where you're just man, Johnny, just reel that in, right? But I do think that he could live at receiver in the NFL. But if anything, it's almost like basketball. It's positionless with him. I'm not even giving him a true position. You know what I mean? We've seen defenses do that with specific guys, right? Where, hey, you're a star, but you can play in the nickel, you play outside, you can play safety, you can move all over the defense. I'm just letting him play wherever. He's going to be a mismatch guy for me, where I could throw him in the slot as a power slot receiver. And you talking about getting him against small 5'10" nickel corners, you know what I mean, and running a quick hitch and let him be a power forward and post up in the red zone, right? But I do think that there's enough route running there for him, because with him being 6'7", he gets low. He'll sink his hips and drive a lot better than a guy truly of his stature should. I think the main thing is going to be with the tight end. conversion is going to be blocking? Like, how committed is he going to be as a blocker? Do you build him up from a frame standpoint? Does he need to put on 10 to 15, maybe 20 pounds of muscle to say, hey, we want to play you in line? And if, or you just Jimmy Graham, because Jimmy Graham didn't block much, right? You know what I mean? So Darren Waller's not the greatest blocker of the world, neither is Travis Kelce. So his block is not it's not a kiss of death for him at tight end, but I do think that he could play wide receiver. I would take him in the 3rd round personally. I just think with his size, for me, I'm an offensive-minded guy. The different things I can do with him and move him around my offense, yeah, I would absolutely take a flyer on him in the 3rd. But I totally understand where you're coming from, Destin, because again, the drops, you want to see him, and I think that's the other thing is like some of this I blame on Jordan Travis. Like, not the most accurate quarterback, ball placements all over the place. I think, one thing we talked about is like Keith will always say, like, man, the process is crazy. Like, you just watch the process for Jordan Travis, but then the end result is good. And it was like, yeah, I guess I rather the process and the result be good, right? So it's like I want to get him with a quarterback that's accurate, that can really put the ball where he can actually win it, helmet or higher, and give him those opportunities. I don't think they didn't trust him to go vertical. I just think it was a situation of the quarterback. That's not really the strength of his game.
And I will say that when it comes to him, it's all going to be about matchups to me.
Yeah.
If you can get him with a good offensive coordinator that can scheme him onto linebackers, scheme him onto safeties, like I just think that's where he's going to make his money. And I just think it's easier to do that at tight end. Now,
Absolutely.
the good pass catching tight ends are going to draw corners. We see corners go to Kelce. We see corners go to Kittle. Sam Laporta as a rookie was drawing corner matchups. So, like, it's going to happen no matter where he's at. It's just, to me, I think it's going to be easier to scheme Johnny Wilson to success at the NFL level if he is lined up in that tight end role more often than not. But
fair.
I watched I was like a couple games into Johnny Wilson's evaluation, and I immediately moved him to a tight end. But I'm with you as far as like not really buying in on Johnny Wilson as a receiver. I just think like the deep speed I feel like is average at best, and even though there are good reps against press coverage and he's fluid for someone of his size, when you get him lined up against a truly high caliber press corner in the NFL, like his frame is just too big. They're going to be able to get their hands on him, and I don't know if he really has what it takes to beat press coverage on the outside. But what made me comfortable moving him to tight end on my board is seeing how much he competes as a blocker. It's obviously going to be a different, assignment, different what he's asked to do moving to tight end as it is at receiver. But like he just eliminates corners from the play on outside runs. There's no lack of physicality and, seems to have pretty good hand placement. I think for me, the biggest thing with Johnny Wilson is, like Damian mentioned, the drops, but then also just the added risk of moving someone positions. And like, once you start to say, okay, we're going to add 10 to 15 pounds, that's just going to have to lower my grade on them because it's just adding another unknown element. Like everything with most stuff with the draft is trying to check off boxes. And when you're creating these unchecked boxes, which there are a lot for Johnny Wilson, that kind of adds to just my concern for him. But I do really like what he can do as a tight end. I think, just the route running, the fluidity, just a historic catch radius, like his ability to pluck the ball out of the air. It makes the drops so frustrating because it's kind of like some other players that we talked about. Like he has the ball skills, he has the tracking, he has that natural talent. It's just about doing it consistently, bringing in the easy catches. But I think Johnny Wilson, he's probably the player in this class, at least for receivers, that's going to be most dependent on usage and scheme and just how they decide to play him.
I'll tell you right now, do not be surprised if he busts a 4 or 5 at the combine. That's around the number that I've heard he's hit before, so don't be surprised with that. And and when I heard it, I was like, I'm not shocked by it because even when I watched him against press coverage, it's feet first, hands second, and his feet are good. His hands are good too. So like he's got strong hands, he's got quick hands, and his feet are quick enough to clear guys. And then when he uses his hands, and it's like now I'm by you. But I've seen him pull away from guys again. Accuracy from the quarterback. Like if I'm vertical down the sideline, don't throw me back to the safety, baby. Like what are we doing? You know what I mean? You're taking every bit of the leverage I just won away from me. So it's going to be very. I agree with James. Is the placement of where he's drafted is going to be so pivotal. But I do think that he can live at wide receiver. I think there's just not a wide receiver comp for him because we've never seen a guy like him. There's only one other 6'7" receiver that I knew that was in college, and that was at Arkansas, Tyrone Broden. That was the only other guy that was 6'6", 6'7", and that played receiver. We don't have many guys that look like this. So it's going to be interesting to see what team, dear God, if he goes to, Denver, he's definitely playing tight end because I know Sean Payton's going to immediately see Jimmy Graham and say, let's go with that, right? Like third, fourth round, let me get my next Jimmy Graham and pair him with Bo Nix and see if you can recreate Drew Brees or something.
Hey, but if you can recreate Drew Brees, I mean, I vote to do that.
It's not going to happen with Bo Nix, though.
Easier said than done, I guess. But we're going to let Dame close us out here with one last player. Which receiver do you feel like you're lower on than the consensus, Dame?
I'm lower on Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky, 5'11", 215. And don't get me wrong, when I say I'm lower on him, he's still a top 100 player for me, like probably top 80 if I'm not mistaken. But I think for me, it's just watching him in person. The thing because one thing I wanted to see, I know he can catch the ball. I know he can run after catch. I know he's physical. He's violent. He gets the Deebo Samuel type of comps, right? Like he's a receiver in a running back build. Like he's built like a running back, 100%. Especially when you see him up close and personal. Like he's built like a RB, but he's extremely raw as a route runner. So, like, you think about guys getting up on the line of scrimmage, you're talking about pre-snap leveraging, walking up on the inside shade and say, yeah, we're not giving you that slant, big fella. Like, how are you going to get open? Can you diamond cut me? Can you run? What can you do to win? And I think he's going to be very – and I know Steve Smith Sr. should be in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, one of the greatest receivers of all time for the Carolina Panthers. Like, he loves them. And I really do like Malachi Corley. But I think he's extremely raw. And I think, like, okay, if you're talking second round, you better have a plan. You better have a plan on how you're going to use him, how you're going to get him the football. I don't see a guy that's going to win a ton of one-on-ones. And that's where I have my concern. Now, against zone, I think he can find the soft spots. He's strong. He's going to catch the ball, make a linebacker miss or run through them. You know what I mean? Run through a safety or nickel corner and make plays after the catch. But when you see tight man-to-man coverage and guys can get into your hip pocket, guys can stick with you. And like I'm watching him run routes on air and I just see stiffness and tightness. I'm like, he's not used to this. So he's going to need some reps and some time for him to really develop as a route runner. And I'm not saying you got to go out there and be Tank Dell, or be Jerry Jeudy or be one of these route running savants, one of these guys that are just routing guys up. But I want to see you be able to snap a comeback or a curl route and then not take you 4 to 5 steps to work back down towards the ball, right? Like it just was a lot of stiffness because he's a muscle-bound frame, and those guys typically are stiffer in general because of their body composition. He's a muscle-bound kid, so I like him. I think third round is probably where I would have him at earliest right now, or right in that sweet spot. Second round, you're just going to need a plan for him. I know a lot of people tie him to Mike McDaniel with the Miami Dolphins and pairing him with Tyreek and Jalen. I'm like, you know what? That's a good fit for that offense. But what we saw from Kansas City when they said, hey, we want to take away the deep threat, what we're going to do? Walk up on the line of scrimmage. We're going to play too high. Can Malachi Corley answer those questions for you when you face too high man-to-man coverage? Right now, I don't believe so. I think it's going to take some time to get him there. I think he's a guy that needs to have a plan. If you don't have a plan for him, you're going to walk in the training camp like, all right, how do we get him going? And that's the question I have in the NFL, because the NFL does this all the time where they draft kids without a plan.
Yeah, I'm with you on Malachi Corley. I think it goes back to the idea of checking boxes, and with Corley, he has two pretty major unchecked boxes for me at this point: route running and beating press coverage. And like that makes me nervous. And when I get nervous, I get scared. I was watching I think I watched 4 games of Malachi Corley, and I saw one rep where he legitimately beat press coverage, and it was against Liberty, and it was against a safety. So like, I think that if he goes into an offense that is solely designed to get him touches and feed him the ball, he could be productive. But I don't know that that's necessarily an efficient way of operating your offense. Like in the NFL, we're going to feed Malachi Corley 12 targets a game. He's a great yak threat in college, but he's going to have to develop the other aspects of his game. I mean, I don't know how many times at the Senior Bowl where he didn't even really try to create separation at the break. He just kind of barreled into like a flat-footed defender and sent him flying backwards and then cut, which like is going to be OPI. I mean, they called it OPI in practice. It's going to be OPI in the NFL. So yeah, I think like he's kind of in that Roman Wilson tier for me of late third, early fourth. Depending on the scheme, and if I knew what exactly their plan for him was, could be talked into him a little bit higher. But I think if it's just like we need a receiver, let's take Malachi Corley, hope that he develops 2 of the 3 most important skills for a receiver in training camp. I think that's a pretty risky plan.
Yeah, I mean, I like Malachi Corley a lot. Now, I think a reason for it that I like him a lot, and when I say I like him a lot, I think there is a real chance that late second round, early third round could happen for him, because I think there's a need for the style of receiver he is. Now, I think the lazy comparing every receiver to Deebo Samuel mold over the last like 3 to 4 seasons has been a lot. It has. I think it's turned some people off of those style of receivers, because every single guy, every single class is like, oh, this could be Deebo. This could be Deebo. They're not productive at the NFL right now. Almost none of them. Now, I will say that I think of most of those guys that we've said, I do think that Malachi Corley plays in a similar light that might be his best role in the NFL.
Agreed.
Now, yeah, and I'm not going to say he is Deebo, because I think those are lazy to just say that you're these guys that are all pro receivers at times. But
on that point, like the fact that Deebo is the comparison that everyone has to go to is telling, because he's the only receiver of that mold that has worked out enough for us to be able to realistically like, how am I going to make a comp to like a practice squad receiver that never plays? I don't know like what they play like, so it's like Deebo's the only one that's worked out. So it's like, yeah, Deebo.
And it's crazy because if you think back, like Deebo as a receiver, you take away the running stuff, Cordell Patterson was basically Deebo before Deebo. Like he did the exact same things. He just didn't have an offensive coordinator that said, we're going to use you in this mold while he was in his prime. I would have loved to see Cordell Patterson in the Kyle Shanahan offense when he was 25, 23, 24, 25 years old, because you would have seen some of the things, because Deebo's route tree is what? Crossers, slants, in breakers, like quick curls and hitches, just run after catch opportunities. That's, to your point, Destin, that's where Malachi Corley can win. But it's like, will you get into it? And I think he could handle some handoffs and stuff, like, because he's built for it, right? A lot of the guys they tried to compete, like Treylon Burks. Treylon Burks was not lining up in the backfield and taking inside zone. That was not going to happen. I absolutely believe that Malachi Corley can take inside zone and take it for 60, because he's that physical of a player. But it's just such a difficult thing.
Well, I mean,
to navigate.
How many players get the privilege to have an offense just scheme them open that much, right? Like that's why the Deebo thing is so hard to replicate, because Deebo is such a special player that it warrants putting so much time, effort into scheming. So it almost makes it to where it limits the amount of teams that Corley can be looked at, right?
Yeah.
But like looking at all these San Fran, Shanahan disciples that are scattered around the NFL, like there are places where him going high could make sense. I mean, Bobby Slowick in Houston coming from that tree. You mentioned Mike McDaniel in Miami, and that fit. Like having a guy that is going to scheme him and knows what they're doing from day one, and that's not also going to have to learn how to do it and then teach Corley how to do it. Like I think that's going to be the best way for him to succeed at the next level. But I can see why that's hard and why that's unrealistic, because you go anywhere else, they're having to do just that if you want to see him in that role. But hey, this has been players that we were high on, players that we're lower on in this receiver class. We're going to talk a lot about this receiver class, so don't you worry. Just because this is the first episode that we've already talked about receivers, we have lots to talk about. Me and James still have to argue about Keon Coleman down the line, and that's coming. But make sure you guys are watching us. Make sure you guys are subscribing to us. We are live on Facebook at A to Z NFL. We are also live on the Film Room YouTube channel. Make sure you guys are liking, subscribing, following all of us on Twitter as you guys see our ads on the screen. And we have a little special surprise as we're going to end here, a segment that we're going to make regular here at the Football Room titled The Draft Tank. So the draft tank is going to be each week. One of us is going to be stepping in and giving us and you a big, bold take that they have on this NFL draft class. And then the other two of us are going to be able to decide if we're with it and we're buying in, or if we're out on what this guy's trying to sell me and we're shutting the door in his face. James is a good sport, and he is recommended, and he has put himself out there, and he's going to go first. So James is going to step into the draft tank for you guys, and we get to hear one of James Foster's big hot takes for this class.
All right. So my take, just give a brief spiel to set this up. Heading into the year, we're looking at the 5 positions on defense. Heading into the year, these were the top players at each position on the consensus board. At edge, we've got Leatu Latu out of UCLA. Defensive line, we've got Johnny Newton out of Illinois. Linebacker, we've got Jeremiah Trotter Jr. out of Clemson. Cornerback, Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. And safety, Cameron Kitchens out of Miami. My take is that none of those players will be the first player drafted at their position.
So let's go down the list one more time. So
Leatu Latu at edge, Johnny Newton at defensive line, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. at linebacker, Kool-Aid McKinstry at corner, and Cameron Kitchens at safety. And you gotta be all in. You're either with me or you're against me. You got to be 5 for 5 on those.
Oh, okay. So that added a twist.
That makes it hot. I mean, that's where the heat comes from on this. I mean, I'll start by saying I don't think it's a crazy take, just because I think this defensive class is going to be hard to tell who's going where. Like, we don't even know when the first defensive player is going to come off in the first round. Like, there's so much offensive hype right now that do we see a defensive player taken in the top 8? I don't know. So going down the line, I mean, I think the least likely.
I mean, there's probably there's a couple that we could probably knock off as like givens that it's not going to happen. Like, what I would say is that I think there's almost no way Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is the first linebacker, for example.
Yeah.
But I mean, you guys might disagree.
I think you're right. I think linebacker is one that I would agree on. Corner, I definitely agree on. I would be shocked if Kool-Aid went first.
Yeah.
I think there's a better chance that Kool-Aid goes 5th than he goes first. I'm not the one in the draft tank, so I'll hold back my hot takes right now. I think the one that really sells me off where I can't go 5 for 5 with you is safeties, because even though I think there are other safeties too, I mean, I think Kitchens playing that hybrid mold gives him the best shot to be the first safety off the board. Like, that hybrid type role is just so desired across the league. And then he wasn't even the safety that I felt like impressed me the most at the Senior Bowl, but every team that I talk to just thinks he's a seamless fit in that hybrid mold. Like, so many guys brought up the Gardner Johnson Eagles fit, and the Eagles being at the latter end of the first. Like, Kitchens was the guy that people kept saying to me at the Senior Bowl, if a safety is going to go round 1, it's going to be him. Like, and I don't know if I agree that should be the case, but that's what NFL reps are telling me. So because there's the stipulation that I have to agree to all 5, I guess I have to be out on James on James's take here, but it's an interesting one, and I definitely had to think about it.
And I'm glad you went first, Destin, because it gave me time to survey my thoughts. I'm actually buying in on this. And the reason why the one I was concerned with was Latu, Latu. But with Latu, it's of course the medicals. That's the first part. But secondly, when you think about Jared Verse and then Dallas Turner being both more explosive, more dynamic, and much better athletes as well, the sub 33s is an issue for Latu also. I think that he could be second, third off the board. And so, yeah, I'm buying this. I'm going all 5. Kitchens had one of the more rougher weeks in Mobile when they put him in man-to-man coverage. And for me, coming in, the safety one discussion hovered around. I know in the summer it was Kalen Bullock from USC. Was it? No, absolutely not. I like him, but he's
my first line in my Kalen Bullock report is built like the cinnamon stick from the Apple Jack commercials.
Wow. All right.
If that's not on the screen, if that's not on the screen right now, we made a mistake. Whenever you guys are watching this,
that is a comparison. I was going to say he's a wiry, thin frame, James.
I gotta come up when you're like 30 safety reports deep. You got to come up with a different way of saying thin, wiry frame, slender build, undersized, needs to add weight.
He's shaped like a receiver. Like he's shaped like a receiver for me, and he's not a great tackler. Like you talking about in the last line of defense. I'm out on it. For me, it was Tyler Nubin. It wasn't at the Senior Bowl. Right, he was not at the Senior Bowl, and then it was Cam Kitchens, and Tyler being the bigger frame, athletic. He could play that hybrid role as well, where you're talking about potentially matching up with tight ends, which is the biggest mismatch in the NFL. I don't think Kitchens offers that against tight ends, and I think he's going to struggle a little bit against some of the corners, but I still like Kitchens as a player. So for me, I'm buying with James in the draft tank. I'm buying all 5. I think there's a real shot that none of those guys are the first player off the board at their position.
Yeah, that should be a tweet though, James. Like with all the names, so we can come back to this, so you can bookmark it. Because the safety one, like I would take Nubin over him. I think you can drop Nubin back in single high at a higher rate than you can drop Kitchens. And like when I've gone back and forth on the two, like that's what has really pushed me towards Nubin. Is that
I could honestly see Jaden Hicks out of Washington State going over Kitchens, honestly. And like I think
I'm with you. It's just every team rep I talked to, man. Like, and I felt like Kitchens was struggling at the Senior Bowl.
He had a really tough week.
So that was definitely like on my mind all week. It's just every person I talk to just thinks he's a seamless fit. And whenever I started to hear that third person tell me that like if a safety has a chance to go round 1, it's Kitchens. And I was like, man, like I don't know if I would do it, but like that's just what is being said in the NFL world right now. And crazier things have happened other than Ricky Pearsall going in the 5th round.
Correct.
But hey, James stepped into the draft tank week 1. Join us again next week. One of me and Damian will put the nerves behind us, and we'll step up on our soapbox and see if we can top James's bold take from week 1. But you guys have been listening and watching the Football Room. You guys can listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Make sure you guys are subscribed on Facebook, YouTube, where you can also see our live streams, and following all of us on Twitter for all of our crazy draft takes throughout the summer, because we're just now getting started, guys. The Super Bowl is over and draft season is here. And there's really no better way to hang out and talk about this than stepping into the Football Room every Wednesday. Thank you guys. Peace.